This is the rigol dl3031, and mine's actually the 3021A, but it's a electronic load, and it can simulate being any resistor, like pretending to be a motor or a heater or something. And the A in mine just means that it has a little bit more range on its voltage capability of the types of loads that it can simulate. So a load is really the opposite of a power supply. Like I said, it can act like a load resistor of a specified value, but in doing that, it can also be set up to draw a fixed amount of current or a fixed amount of voltage or power or something. And now this really works in tandem with a DC power supply. It doesn't have to have a DC power supply, but obviously in order for a load to be useful, it's got to be part of a circuit. And so either you're connecting to a power supply or you're connecting to a driver circuit or a motor controller or whatever, a battery charger, something like that. So I am going to go ahead and power up both of these units, and we can just see what it is like using the rigol dl3031. So the first thing you want to look at is just the basic modes that it can be over here. So here's constant current, and I know that didn't change much on the screen. It was already in constant current mode, but you can see that the parameter highlighted in the red says current. We change that to voltage, resistance, or power. So let's start out with something basic. Let's tell this to be a 10 ohm load. So you can come down here to the keypad and type 10 ohm. So now it thinks that, or it's going to pretend to be a 10 ohm resistor. And now I'll set my DC power supply to 10 volts. And I'll connect some jumper cables to the input terminals on the load. So first I'll turn on the output on my power supply, but then I also have to turn on the load to connect it. So now we see it's reading about 10 volts and it's drawing about 1 amp, which is expected since 10 volts divided by 10 ohms is 1 amp. Now we could try a different mode like constant current and set the current to say 500 milliamps. Let's see. Okay. And now it turned itself off in entering in a different setting, which is a good thing. And now we can turn it back on, and it's drawing half an amp. You can see it has changed its resistance such that at whatever voltage is being applied on it, half an amp will be drawn, and I'll show you that by increasing the voltage from 15 or from 10. I'll bump it up to 15. And we're still drawing half an amp, but now the resistance increased to counteract the increase in voltage. We also have constant voltage mode, and we could tell it to to load down the power supply such that a certain voltage is shown. So now the power supply is set to 15, and I'm going to tell it to load down the power supply until it gets to 10 volts. Oh, we gotta turn it on. And it looks like at about 3.3 ohms, that is the amount of load that is required to take the power supply. And actually the power supply is giving us as much as it can, 3 amps, so that might be a little bit more aggressive than what the power supply can handle. So let me, instead of 11 volts, I'll just set this to 12 volts, which will require less of a load, if that makes sense. And we're still drawing 3 amps. And the last feature that I'm going to show you is the short button, which does exactly that. Just shorts the two terminals together. At this point, you'd expect to see pretty much 0 volts dropped across, and the amperage will be however much amperage your power supply can handle. Obviously, use this button with caution if you're not attaching it to a regulated supply that has constant current protection. If you did this to a battery, say, then that would, well, I guess then this thing would have some maximum to what it could handle, but it could be theoretically quite a lot of power. I believe that this unit will sync up to 40 amps, so just be careful that clicking that button could suddenly cause a very dramatic draw. So as you can see, the DC load can be used in a pretty simple fashion, but it is able to pretend to be a lot of different devices, so that way you don't have to have a bag full of huge resistors for testing devices. This thing can be it all. So that is just a quick overview of what it's like using the rigol dl3031.